What makes the difference between those who take the risk and those who never quite do?
Two things. Number one, the comfort zone. I think a lot of people, like you're saying, they have the skills, they even have the money, they have everything they need to succeed in whatever it is they're doing, but they just stay in their comfort zone because it's comfortable. But they think, oh, I'm nervous, I'm uncertain. That means that this is a bad idea. It's really them letting the fear of failure, the fear of embarrassment, the fear of what if I do this and it doesn't work, then I'm going to feel like I'm worthless. Like that's kind of what it boils down to. So that's number one. They don't exit that comfort zone at any given point. Number two, they haven't done the rocking chair test. Or like imagine, and you could visualize if you're listening, but if you're 80 years old, your eyes are closed, you're in your rocking chair, you're on your porch, you're retired, you're just rocking back and forth, and you think, do I have any regrets? Like, did I do the thing, and if it didn't work out, I still gave it my all? Like I tried the business, or I changed careers, or I pursued my passion, and I really gave it my all, or not? Most people, they'll do that test and they'll think, oh, the way I'm doing things right now, I'm going to be failing that rocking chair test 50, 60 years down the road. So that sometimes has to be what I tell myself, because I'm a little bit comfortable in certain ways more than I was when I started. So I'm even a little like, once you have maybe resources, when you didn't, you become more protective because the scarcity doesn't leave you. So you're not 100% abundant, but I still have to do that test. Like if I don't keep growing, if I don't keep changing, I'm going to do that test later on and think, hey, you had great initial progress those first 10 years, and then you got comfortable, and then you did what you tell people not to do. So I think it's those two things.
No, that's good. You know, we're in the process of, because I've noticed that a lot of times when you're called to make the risk, isn't always at the opportune time. You know, I think about whether it's purchasing a piece of property here around the church or a campus. Right now, we're in the process of starting a university. You know, in the last 3 or 4 years of the church that is financially challenging since COVID as any time since I've been here. So ideally, it's not the ideally time to take the risk of starting something brand new like a university, but you know, it's now the time. Now we've gotten the license from the State Department of Education. You know, those things have all fallen in line. The question is, are you going to go then trust, you know, in our case, trust God and trust the people that He's brought us and the abilities that we have to start this university that in the long run can have a huge impact on worldview, have a huge impact on developing the next leaders or business people or president or ministers or whatever, and financially can impact the church 100 years from now when we're all gone. So, you know, it's that we all think, you know, if the risk would just come at the right time, but I don't know, is that your experience? You know, that risk and opportune, they don't always fit together
They
just
never
right.
do. I call it the perfect time tax, because I work with a lot of people, but I've also spoken with a lot of people, whether I do like a seminar or they're trying to work with me, and they're like, this is great, Alex, but like right now is not the perfect time. When the time is perfect, or when I have the right amount of money, or when I have the right amount of energy, like they're waiting for this perfect time that will never come. And it's kind of a form of perfectionism, which people think is a good thing, but it's really not. Sometimes good is good enough. I'm sure. And that's why you're willing to take that risk that you did with the university, because you've grown and you said, you know what, I've lived through so many economic cycles or cycles with the church. So you're confident that if we execute this, it's going to work out in the future, even if the present is a little bit stressful. I think sometimes if people don't live through those stressful experiences, they don't have the grit to make those decisions. So sometimes we have to be thankful for the stress that we've had, business, financial, personal, spiritual, whatever it is. Because once you live through that and you go to the other side, you're like, whoa, I'm stronger than I thought I was. You know, but I think sometimes people avoid those extreme stressful situations if they can choose so, or if it happens, they quit. But then again, they'll look back in 60 years and be like, oh, wow, like I never really gave it my all. I never saw anything through. But that's why people that say, oh yeah, you can start it with no money, or you can just figure it out, it's because they did at some point, like you and I.
Yeah. And I just encourage anybody that's watching or listening to follow your example in the sense of doing it while you're young, because the reality is, you know, you tend to think that as you get older, you'll have more of the things you need in order to succeed. And truth is, maybe you do have more stuff, more resources, more relationships, but all that means is you have more to lose. Fear is a great non-motivator. You can become comfortable. And if you haven't been through it, if you didn't take risk when you were young and see, how you worked through it, and that all the things you just said are so true. But if you don't see those when you're young, I believe that they're more difficult as you get older, even though you may have more resources and more connections. You may have all the stuff that when you were young, you think you needed to succeed, but that just means, you've got less time to, when you're young, if it all screws up, you can always start over. I just turned 58, and, the reality is, a midlife crisis is when you come to an age where you realize you don't have enough time to accomplish all the things you used to dream of doing. And it's like, how do you deal with that? Because I think a lot of times our dreams are they're just for us, one generation. And biblically, I think we could even be held responsible for 3 generations. And I would challenge people, is your dream bigger than just you, bigger than just your kids, and are you willing, is your dream big enough that you're willing to succeed, even if you're not the one that succeed, that brings it about? It's like, hey, I'd love to, whatever, but what if it's my grandchild?
What if you're just planting the seeds for their eventual success?
Yeah. In the Bible, you have David who wanted to build the temple, and God said, no, you can't do it. And so David raised the money for a temple that he would never see. And it's like, I think a lot of times we forget that, and then we go through a midlife crisis because we think, the temple's never going to be built in my lifetime. God, what's up? I don't understand. It's not. And it's like, no, the dream's bigger than one lifetime. And I think we're always challenged to do that. And as we get older, if we didn't do it when we were young, it becomes more challenging as we get older. Now, I want to come back to all that, but I really had a question that I thought would be interesting maybe for folks that's not often talked about. And I wanted to talk, you've been successful, especially, in so many different ways, but I wanted to talk about generosity for a moment, okay? And get your perspective on it, because, as a pastor, churches are funded through obedience, if you believe the Bible, generosity, if you don't, in the sense of other people helping the church we're not selling something, we're providing a service. We marry and bury and disciple, but generosity, whether it's at a church or whether it's a foundation or whatever it is, there's the sense of, I'm going to help you, but my motivation is to help me. In other words, it either gives me influence into your life. It's as opposed to, I'm going to be generous because there's value in being generous. And have you worked through any of that? Have you thought through any of that? What have you seen in your own life, in the lives of the folks that you work with, as far as the role that real, generosity plays? In other words, you're giving something away, and there's always a return, but the return is not in your bank account.
Apples, yeah. I think if you're generous when you don't have much, if you are generous, then you will be generous and you will be more abundant. So I think I look at it as kind of scarcity and abundance, where, there's the IHOP down the road, there's John the Baker. So when I would be at the Starbucks, working, I'd be starving. This is when I had maybe $500 to my name, $1,000 to my name. If I had a waitress that was like over the top, amazing, like next level service, and it's like a little diner, a little IHOP, if my bill was like $20, I'd give them 40, or like I would give them 50, which isn't a lot numerically, but it is like, that's 5% of my net worth, right, if you think about it at the time. But I did it without thinking about it. Or even I talk about the missions trip. I believe it was Hurricane Maria. We went to Puerto Rico. You guys helped sponsor us. And I haven't been on a trip since that. I came back relaxed and recharged and energized because it was totally out of generosity of some money, but really time and trying to care on them and love on these people that went through such a tragedy like they were my family. I've been on trips since then, and I come back and nothing relates to that. So I think when you're generous, when you don't have a lot, that changes something in your mind so that it helps you think, hey, I'm giving this away. I'm not getting something directly back in return because I know I'm going to add some value in my other aspects of life, and I'm going to get even more back. So it's kind of a constant trade-off of how can I get out of scarcity more into abundance. And I think generosity is one of the biggest things. And if you don't have money, you can give time. If maybe you don't have time, but you have money, you can give more financial resources. I mean, resources is everything that we have. Financial is a resource,
Right.
like you're saying, this church and all the great things that you guys do, it runs off of people's generosity with their time, but also financial resources. So I think you have to look at where you're at and think, okay, am I really being as generous as I can be, or even slightly? And I think people have to really ask themselves, what can I do? Again, maybe you can't do 30 hours a week of volunteering, but maybe you do 30, right? Maybe you start with 4, maybe you do 5, and maybe you just think about, how can I switch from that scarcity to more abundance in different areas of my life? So, I mean, that's my experience, but everybody's different. But that's just, again, and even as I've grown my business and maybe made more, donating and doing like Feeding America, feeding like tens of thousands of people, I've been doing that. And I want to feed like over my career 100 million. So that's, I have
Right.
time to do that. But yeah, so balancing that, like what's this going to do for me right now? Sometimes you have to say, hey, this is what I'm doing, and it's fine. I don't need to make the initial return on investment, but I know it's going to work out in the long run.
Yeah, I think, there's a lot of folks who have a lot of stuff, and not in any sense negative, but they're hollow on the inside. And I think, the role of generosity allows you to be a part of something that is bigger than you, and sadly, I think we can all live our whole life, and maybe it's not till we get towards the end of it that we realize that we accomplished a lot, but none of that's really going to last. We weren't a part of something. The thing that lasts is our people, relationships and what we're building. We've had a guy here that was one of the first 4 families. He was 86 years old. He hadn't been here in forever, and he came by and he was just amazed. Those 4 or 5 families borrowed, they didn't have enough money to buy this land. And it was $25,000. Okay, that's how much the property here cost. And so they all had to go get personal loans to give to the church to buy the land. And, today that property is worth $25 million, and it's multiplied over and over again. And they're a part of that. And there was a cost, there was a risk, there always is if you're going to give yourself or your resources to something that's meaningful. But how we all get the opportunity, but so few take the opportunity to be a part of something that is lasting in that way, and impactful in that way. And I just encourage folks, if they've never really thought about, what are they giving to? And I'm not just talking about their money, but just that which is valuable in their life, whatever it is, to something that is it's not directly coming back to them. It's not something they're going to drive or wear, or, it's not a platform that they're hoping to get on. There's, generosity can be motivated by influence. And I'm not saying those things are bad, right? Anytime you help people, it's good to help people. But I think there's a deeper impact when we help people or become a part of something that doesn't have a direct connection back to us. And when we get towards the end of our lives, we're able to look and say, I was there's meaning and fulfillment in that. Or that's, again, what I see in so many folks along the way. And so, again, I just encourage folks who are watching or listening to think about that for their own life. What are they a part of? Because like you say, it's not about just being wealthy. It's everybody's got something. And so, anyways, that's just a little side note for those of you who are listening today, but just something I've kind of always wondered, because there are lots of nonprofits and all kinds of foundations and all kinds of things that people give their money to. And Americans especially, I don't know where you're listening from, but, Americans are often generous people, and helping in different ways around the world. So let's talk about, I know anytime you talk about success, you talk about taking new ground, that people have, I can't, so talk about some of those that you've helped people overcome. I know we've already talked about a few, but what are some of the other things that, people, they want to go to the next channel, or they want to, but it gets in people's way from actually succeeding?
Mm-hmm. I think the number one thing I help people with is setting that end destination. So whatever that is for them, maybe it's a certain amount of revenue, or for some of my clients, it's like, I'd love to grow my business enough where I can give $500,000 a year in just pure tithing, or a certain amount of meals, right? once you set the end destination, then you can revert back to the present and think, what I'm doing right now, is that going to get me there? 99% of the time, of course not, right? That's why they're talking to me. So then they have to think, okay, well, that's the end destination, whether it's a year from now, 10 years, 20 years. So what is that step-by-step basic action plan that they can do starting today? So I think it's taking things out of their brain or out of ideas into execution. We all know someone with $1 million idea or even $1 million skill set or whatever it is, but they don't execute on it because they make it too complex, right? Complexity is the enemy of execution. So if you have simplicity and think, hey, here's the end target, here's where I'm headed. Again, it doesn't have to be numeric, but it should be objective, because then it's like, okay, am I on the right track or am I not? It's not a feeling. It's like, I am 50% of the way there, I'm 0% of the way there. Whatever their target is, then you have to go back to right now and think, what is that step-by-step plan? What actions can I take to get closer to that? Not that it's going to happen anytime soon, possibly, but what are the things I can control? Again, going back to self, what are things that I can control that maybe don't even take money that I can start doing? Like you mentioned, even planting seeds for the next generation. Maybe that's their target. So taking accountability, starting to take action consistently for a long period of time. If you do that with your fitness, your health, your wealth, your spirituality, you're going to be successful. Your generosity, long-term, right? Consistency and just taking action with tunnel vision, it's going to work out.